Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to Addis Dialogue. And my guest today is Bajabulile Swazi Shabalala. She is a candidate for the presidency of the African Development Bank, AfDB, endorsed by the cabinet of the South African government. She resigned from her position as the senior vice president of the AfDB to avoid any potential conflicts of interest during her candidacy. And as the only female candidate among the 5 contenders for this position, she has unveiled amazing, remarkable vision for enhancing the institution's efficiency, transparency, and overall impact. And I'm so honored to have her on the show. And she's joining me via Zoom today. I am your host, Shifara Olago. Do stay with us. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Johannesburg.
Let's jump right into it. The African Development Bank, AfDB, has made significant strides in enhancing its operations. But there are issues of efficiency and transparency, which remain key concerns for its stakeholders. So given the global emphasis on accountability in international financial institutions, what measures should the AfDB implement?
Thank you very much. I want to echo the comments you've just made, that in fact the bank has made significant strides, in the few years. Of course, I was part of the senior management at the bank. Happy to work with colleagues at the time to make these advancements. So it's really my campaign and manifesto is on how we build on the successes of the last few years, how we enhance efficiency, particularly in the context of the G20 MDB reform working group recommendations, which asked for MDBs to be bigger, bolder, and better. And more importantly, accelerate and massify development impact as the MDBs. So my focus is really on efficiency, how we can improve efficiency, and also how impact, development impact. And really this is around infrastructure. I do think that to really thrive and grow as a continent, very, very important that we step up and level up in terms of our efforts on infrastructure. And as you know, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, on its success actually depends on having infrastructure, making sure that every African has access to electricity and that we have connecting roads and we have connecting rails. So that is really my focus. And I think the AfDB has an excellent reputation for infrastructure financing. And it's really a question of how we refocus on the efforts around infrastructure, because it is the basis for the Africa we want.
In light of global financial challenges and the need for robust institutions, what specific reforms should the AfDB be considering to ensure greater efficiency and transparency, as well as accountability? And how do these reforms align with your vision for the institution's role in Africa's economic growth?
My very strong view is without infrastructure, Africa cannot develop. You can't industrialize electricity. It's the very basic foundation of industrialization. So when I talk about transformation of the organization, I'm really talking about 2 things. One of them is internally. How is it that we can, in fact, improve our internal processes and procedures in order to ensure that we can deliver projects a lot quicker? And I have some ideas in this, which I'm developing in the manifesto that I have to submit to the Board of Governors. But in addition to that, there are improvements that are possible and opportunities of working more closely with the regional development banks, so the other development institutions, working a lot closer with the project implementation units in each of the countries, but also working with the regional economic communities, and most importantly, the private sector, given that they have the resources that Africa needs to be able to close this 100 billion we have annually for infrastructure development.
As Africa seeks to unlock its full economic potential, the AfDB plays a crucial role, as you said, in fostering sustainable development and things like that. However, as you know, critics often argue that excessive intervention in financial systems can hinder economic autonomy. So if you are elected, how will you balance AfDB's leadership role in driving Africa's economic growth while minimizing unnecessary intervention in national financial systems?
I am of the very firm view that development success depends on countries. And the African Development Bank, as an institution with the capital and the knowledge, only assists the countries to implement their own development plan. So for me, it is just as important that countries themselves have the plans, have the wherewithal to be able to execute and implement those plans. And of course, we stand ready to support, this vision. This also applies to regional economic communities. So the bank is the African Development Bank is a bank with a lot of financial using its capacity, using its resources, using its knowledge to assist the countries to implement their development. So why it's important that we work with the economic communities as well in order to facilitate integrated infrastructure, and also work with organizations like Order, because of course at the African Union level, this is where the heads of state of the African countries, the member countries of the African Development Bank, they sit together and agree on priorities for Africa's development, for Agenda 2063, and for the Africa we want. So our role is to really see how we can accelerate these engagements and collaborations for Africa's development. But certainly, I think the idea is that it's very clear to me development has to be by the leadership of those countries.
Let's also take some time and talk about Ethiopia. As you know, Ethiopia's recent decision to allow foreign banks to operate within its borders, I think marks a significant shift in its economic policy. In this regard, considering the AfDB's role in supporting financial aid and economic development across the continent, of course, what is your stance on such a move that Ethiopia has taken, and how do you believe this could affect Ethiopia's financial system and, of course, broader regional economic integration?
Very impressed, in fact, by the recent reforms announced in Ethiopia. Of course, Ethiopia is not a stranger to these kinds of changes. Having introduced a commodity exchange, in Ethiopia many years ago, and I know it also led by a woman at the time. So I think that it's very, very important that especially in the current times that we live in, with all these geopolitical challenges and the reduction of foreign aid, I think it's very, very important that countries focus on developing their own financial sector and their capital markets. If we want to mobilize private sector financing and commercial bank financing for development, it is very, very important reforms take place, and I applaud Ethiopia for having taken these decisions and introduced these reforms. And what role the bank can do is, for instance, start working with the government of Ethiopia and the Minister of Finance specifically to see how we can develop capital markets. For instance, in other countries, we have issued local currency bonds as the African Development Bank. And this is something that we can consider doing in Ethiopia, eventually being able to actually issue as the African Development Bank in the capital markets of Ethiopia. So this is the way that we can actually help to deepen, because obviously you will have new investors who will come into Ethiopia attracted by the fact that the African Development Bank is actually issuing in local currency in Ethiopia. This is exactly the role that we are supposed to play. So, and having discussions with the government in Ethiopia to see how we can assist in this regard. But, again, let me applaud Ethiopia for these developments.
Africa is facing, an escalating debt crisis, as you know, with many nations now struggling to manage their financial obligations. And as the leading institution focused on the continent's development, how does the AfDB plan to address such issues?
Well, let me note that, in fact, there's been a lot of effort globally as well to try and address the debt issue. And of course, the debt issue is a very complex one. The reasons for its existence are very complex. One of the things that we need to always consider is that when we talk about the indebtedness of a country, it is, we're talking about the amount of debt it has against its GDP. So even as we talk about, addressing the debt situation, we also need to look at the things that are inhibiting African countries from growing their GDP at such a rate that it can improve their overall, indebtedness position. So this is important, and I think that my campaign is really a denominator of that indicator of debt to GDP. You really see how we can increase the GDP of Africa, industrialize the and encourage intra-regional trade. But in addition to that, the debt by countries, some of them are very good at it, so even as the debt increases, they are managing it well. They are deploying that debt very well to projects that will deliver results over the long term consumption. But we also need to consider, in addition of public debt by countries and helping them to build the capacity management, we also need think about steps that can to assist countries to file, because if you recall, the problem is that a lot of this debt, which was issued in international capital markets, is short, but it's been used to actually fund long-term development in countries. So the MDBs, I think, can try to change the profile of that debt, working with countries. We also, I think, need to do some work on actually explaining the riskiness of African debt. And I think this is the work that the African Union is working on with the African Union Credit Rating Agency, which will really focus, hopefully, helping countries to manage also their credit profile and their ability to communicate the riskiness of their countries, because I think that in general, African countries are rated a lot riskier than in fact they are. In fact, I was listening to this Standard Bank group who are saying that even for South Africa, with a very sophisticated financial market, he believes that is 4 notches below what it should be. So you can imagine that how difficult this problem is for smaller countries.
As you know, the global financial systems play a pivotal role in shaping the economic future of developing regions, including Africa. In this regard, how can global financial institutions better support the AfDB's efforts in driving economic growth and ensuring stability and fostering transformative change across the continent. And what partnerships or reforms do you envision to strengthen these global alliances if elected?
The kind of concessional financing that many countries in Africa continue to need, that all efforts should continue on making sure that at least the poorest countries on the continent continue to have access on this type of concessional financing. But I think that in addition to that, I've already talked a little bit about the rating of of African risk in Africa. There's work being done, for instance, on the wealth of the continent in terms of its mineral wealth and how this can be better reflected in the credit of African countries that is assigned by the international rating agencies. And of course, I think that work is being done at the level of as well to look at how the international financial architecture can be improved. But I must emphasize that, international solutions are going to be harder and harder to come by for Africa. This is just the reality that we face today. And what we do as Africans is to look to ourselves to see how we can address these issues. And of course, I think that, our ability to actually develop our own capital markets so that we can borrow in local currency, we don't have to borrow in foreign currency because obviously the taxes we collect to be able to repay that debt are in local currency. So you have this mismatch. So these are things that we can work on to see how we can deepen capital markets, also to mobilize, institutional resources in Africa. When I left, the bank was approving lending of about $10 billion a year. So, an increase over the last years. And of course, it was necessary to help Africa recover from the COVID and also the war in Ukraine, which also challenged Africa's food security.
Thank you very much for those brilliant and wonderful ideas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in Addis Ababa the next time I'm there.
Yeah, I would be honored, and I'd be looking forward to seeing him. Bye. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Many thanks to you as well for having been with us so far. Until I see you next time with yet another program, it's a goodbye from me, Shfarolak.